to the next example on how ministries are using data. We have to make a reduction on greenhouse gases, especially CO2 emission. And of course, the ministry is looking into what is the best way of reducing the emission of greenhouse gases. They can, of course, reduce the number of cattle. That will reduce the emission. They can change the technologies used for growing crops. That might reduce. Or we have a lot of such areas in Denmark, wetlands, where they have been draining or pumping away water. So you have some areas with a lot of organic materials. And you have a lot of emission from those areas when you are producing on them. Oops.
Maybe I can just say that. I mean, in the EU, probably like here, agriculture contributes about 10% to greenhouse gas emissions. So it's a sector that is also targeted, not by each country. Each country, like Azerbaijan, has a different approach, which sectors can most effectively reduce CO2, but agriculture is definitely one.
Okay. But Rainer just mentioned that agriculture.
You can.
Okay. Rainer just mentioned that agriculture contribute with 10% of the greenhouse emission in EU.
Yeah, just as an explanatory note. Henry, thank you very much. This sounds very, very interesting. Unfortunately, I have to leave now. I just wanted to add one word. Of course, in the EU, on average, the agricultural policy for all EU member states contributes between, on average, about 30% to farm income, and in some countries even up to 50% of farm income. This is why we pay particular attention to FADN and other ways of monitoring the effectiveness of the impact of our agricultural policy on farm income and on rural development.
And what the politicians in Denmark, they would like to do, it is to make some voluntary agreement with farmers that they could take out their meadows, their wetland areas of production, and then they could get a compensation. This is of course a bit complicated. If you calculate the compensation and make it too low, farmers will not take out their lands. We will not get this reduction in emission of greenhouse gases. If you put the compensation too high, then suddenly too many farmers want to take out their wetlands. You'll be having too much reduction, and you'll overcompensate the farmers. You'll give them too much money. And of course, no politicians will be accused to overpay farmers for something not even saving the environment. So they made analyses made based on the FADN database. They combined it with other databases where, for example, they had information on draining on the fields, where they had information on what type of soil there were on the different farms. And that way they could combine data from different databases, make these complicated econometric analyses to see how much should the farmers be compensated so they would get a fair compensation. And also we could get an optimal use of the money paid by the Ministry of Finance. I also have to say these calculations were quite complicated because we have to take into consideration what is the production on the farm. If the farmers have cattle that could not any longer got feed from the meadows, then that would be resulting in a reduction in the number of cows. If farmers had some specific crop rotation system, then some crop rotation system would cost farmers more than others, and so on. So therefore it was quite complicated analysis. And they ended up with that farmers should get compensated up to 15,000 euro per hectare for taking out the land of production. 15,000 euro per hectare. That's quite a lot of money. But of course, they're also taking out their land forever. So they cannot go back and produce next year. So it's a sum paid one time in life. We have some other examples. We pay farmers special subsidies if they are converting from converting to organic production. So how much should the farmers get in subsidies to convert their production into organic production? We give subsidies for afforestation, to plant trees for the future. We give compensation if farmers have dwarfed. How much should they be compensated if the harvest have not been good for a long time? And then besides that, of course, the Ministry of Agriculture would like each year to see how is the economy in the agricultural sector as a whole, and how is it in different subsectors. How is the economy in organic farming? And at EU level, they do the same. Again, it's always, when we are calculating the impact, it's always also an issue on to see how much are farmers affected by some changes in the policy, and how much should they be compensated so they get a fair compensation. I just have to mention also that in the Danish FADN we have 2,100 farms. It's not many, but it's some. Of them, 700 are organic farms. They have been selected especially so we would be able to compare organic farms with non-organic farms for cattle production, for poultry production, for special horticulture production. Also fisheries was a big issue in Denmark, so therefore they collected accounts from fishermen to see how much money are they making on their boat. When I look into your action plan for development of the rural districts, you have some actions related to establishing tourism, on-farm tourism. So if this is very, very important, maybe you in Azerbaijan should think over collecting accountancy data or other data from those companies providing agricultural tourism, or from those farms providing agricultural tourism, so you can see how it's going there. In old times we had a lot of dairies in Denmark, and also all dairies, they make their accounts on the same software. They used the same accountancy system. So it was also easy there to collect data from all dairies and make benchmarks to see who are doing it well, who are not doing it so well. So each of the managers of the different dairies, they could agree on how they would, or they could find out how they could improve their production. So that might also be an issue here in Azerbaijan. Maybe some of those who make on-farm production, on-farm processing, they would like to provide some data and share them with others who are having similar production, so they can see how good they are doing, where can they do better, where are they very good. That's also a possibility that could be considered. As I said in the very beginning, Ministry of Agriculture was one of the users of the data. Another user were the farmers. It has been a tradition in Denmark, in other EU countries, and also in the EU as a whole, to make analysis of the different subsectors on agriculture. For example, we have here the front page. Of such a publication where they're analyzing the economy for cattle farms. Again, this analysis where the typical traditional analysis from old time, analysis of cost, profitability, investments, are organic farms better than others? What is the economy of scale? What is break-even price on milk, for example? We have an overview for 10 years. Again, very traditional analysis. And in addition, farmers has also got analysis for benchmarking, individual feedback, where they have the different indicators for their own farm in one column. They have average for other farms in another column. And then they can compare their own farm, figure by figure, to similar other farms to identify areas of improvements. This is especially good if you can combine the financial figures, the technical figures from milk recording systems or from breeding information, so you can also have the technical information. Change in production has also been analyzed. For example, milking robots were introduced quite a long time ago in Denmark on big farms. And farmers were always asking, is it profitable? Is it profitable to have milking robots instead of the other systems we have? If you ask a salesman from those companies selling milking robots, they only have one answer. Yes, it's profitable, do it. But if you go out and ask the farmers, then the experience is a little different. So, what was important to do for the Agricultural Advisory Service? It was to say, let us prove what is the situation by introducing milking robots. Let's analyze the economy, the financial situation of those farms with milking robots compared with other farms to see how good is it. Or we could compare different housing systems. You know, we have the loose housing systems where the animals are walking around. In the cattle production, we also had the tied up system, where the animals were fixed and could not move around. And of course, we could analyze different systems as well to see what is most profitable. Good. There also have been other technical issues that have been analyzed. For example, is if a higher milk yield of the dairy cows, is it profitable or not? So just to say, we analyze all these things to get better knowledge. So advisors, they know what to tell the farmers when the agricultural advisors, they know what to tell the farmers when they go out. What are really the benefits? For companies in the agricultural sector, especially for banks, it is important to know what are the risks on credit to farmers. So they have used figures from the Danish FADN system to assess the risk on their credits. Then they also know how much reserve they should have according to the legislation. So that's one issue. Sellers of machinery and equipment have been very interested in figures for their market analysis to see what can we expect to sell next year, what should we produce. It has always been the situation that figures from the individual farms are not handed out to any companies. Companies can get analyses made on a number of farms or some averages of farms, but they cannot get individual figures. It cannot be so that one day you deliver the FADN data and 2 days later you have some salesman from the company knocking at your door and wants to sell something. We have several breeds of animals, also cattle, and one of the big discussions in Denmark is which breed is the best and give the best economy. Is it the Holstein Friesian? Is it the Jersey cows? Or is it, we have also a red breed, I don't know the name in English. And of course, economy of different breeds have been analyzed, as well as insurance companies have used the figures both to assess the risk and also to assess how much compensation they should give to farmers. Insurance companies in Denmark, they both pay compensation for losses of assets. If a building is burning down, of course, they will replace the building, but they also will give some compensation for losses in profit for the period where the farmer could not produce. So an issue is, of course, to assess how much profit is the farmer losing. How much does it cost him not to have a production for a period? In the Agricultural Advisory Service, we have used figures also to assess the workload in the advisory service and to assess how we should plan our activities. There was an introduction of state guaranteed credits to support farmers in crisis some years ago, and I was the one at national level who were coordinating that activity. And for each local office of the advisory service, it was an issue on how many persons should they delegate to support farmers in applying for this subsidy. On the one hand, they would not delegate too many persons because they have to be trained, they have to get the new knowledge. They might need 2 weeks to find out all the details. And that's a huge investment for something that is where you can apply for a period of 3 or 4 months. So on the one hand, not too many advisors should be allocated to this task. On the other hand, there should be a sufficient number of advisors so all farms could be served. For each office of the advisory service, we were able to analyze the accounts of the farmers there. We could assess how many were fulfilling the conditions for applying for the credits, and we could provide that information to the manager of the local advisory center. So he could assess the workload and he could find out how many persons he should allocate. Then a problem we always have in our analysis, it is, do they really reflect the reality? We see that when we make analysis 20 years ago, 30 years ago, on is it better to have Holstein Friesian than Jersey cattle? Of course, it was interesting analysis, but the impact were not so big. When we now make analysis on how much compensation should the farmers have to take out areas of production to reduce the greenhouse gas emission, or what is the value of killing all mink, then suddenly we have large effects of our results. And therefore we also need to be sure that the calculations we are making, they are okay, and that we do not find exactly the right figures for the compensation, but if it's a little to one side or the other, it's okay. But it should not be too much to one side. We recently have had 2 examples on that some impact evaluation have not been good in Denmark. In EU, we have quotas on fish. How many tons of fish are the fishermen allowed to take out of the ocean every year? Now it shows up that those estimates and the models that have been used, they have overestimated the stock of fish in the ocean. So now the quotas have been reduced by 85%. Or to say it in another way, we are closing down fishery in some areas of Denmark because no one can survive in reducing with the 85% reduction of their activities. We have made estimates on nitrate pollution, and of course there were some mistakes in the models developed by our university. That is what happened. But certainly there were made much stronger restrictions for the farmers because they were polluting much more than the researchers they expected. Yes. And as we said, if we are compensating farmers or we're giving subsidies to farmers, we do not want these compensations to be calculated wrong, because if they're calculated too small, farmers will not apply or they will not use the scheme, if the compensation is calculated too high, then you have too many applicants, and no minister of agriculture wants to go out and say half of those who have applied for something cannot get the subsidy. That's a huge issue. This is a Danish farm as it looked some years ago. It's a cattle farm. And of course, the production of milk from cattle farm, it's quite a big sector in Denmark as well. So therefore, the dairy sector have been very, very much analyzed. Our Statistic Denmark, it is the same institution as your statistical office here. They are making statistics on a lot of things. For example, also how much milk we are selling in Denmark. And at a time there were certain focus on that whole milk with the normal fat level of fat should not be as healthy and as the low fat milk, and therefore they were watching how much milk are consumed in Denmark with different level of fat. And suddenly they came out a press release saying, now the consumption of low fat milk in Denmark is larger than the consumption of whole milk. I got a dairy in the phone the same day as this press release came out, and he said he did not understand this press release because, according to his knowledge, they were selling much more low-fat milk than whole milk. So how can it be that the consumption suddenly should have been shifted now if there have been no changes in their sales and sales of other dairies as well? So we had to look into the figures. And the problem was, of course, that Statistic Denmark were looking into how much milk is consumed. Also what the farmers are consuming of their own produced milk. So Statistic Denmark have put in a standard in their statistics, saying that each farm family were consuming 10 liters of milk per day. This was a standard that was introduced in old days when we had this type of farms, where there were 2, 3, 4 staff, all drinking milk from the farm, where the wife of the farmer used a lot of milk in preparing food. And of course, at that time, a standard of 10 liters of milk per day per farm might have been okay. But for sure, it's not okay today. So Statistic Denmark have for a lot of years had a standard that were outdated. I have another example of that we use standards in databases that are outdated. At the National Center of the Advisory Service in Denmark, we were trying to analyze how many hours are the individual farmer actually working at his farm. And when I started to making some econometric analysis, suddenly came out that some of the farmers had a negative number of hours working on the farm. And we're saying, how can it be negative? And we realized that there were in our databases some there were in our databases some standards for reduction of number of working hours for hired service and reduction for hired labor. And these standards were calculated as 1 working hour is so and so many Danish kroner. But as these standards have not been adjusted for many years, suddenly the reduction showed out to be too big. Again, an example on that standards in databases might be good, but need to be updated. That's one of the problems we have. Standards are not good. Another problem we have, it is variation among the farmers in real life. We have here an example. It's difficult to see. We have here an example on variation on profit on cattle farm.